Hey everyone, let's just jump right into this ultimate high-yield study guide to help you completely master those foundational psychology concepts and, totally ace your upcoming exams. Whether you're stressing over a midterm right now or just looking to really solidify your grasp on the core pillars of psychological science, this explainer is built entirely for you. We're going to cut right through the noise. We're focusing squarely on the exact concepts, the definitions, and those tricky biological structures that literally always show up on tests. So let's get into it. Here is our blueprint for today's explainer. First up, we're hitting psychological research methods. Second, brain structures and functions. Third, learning and conditioning. And fourth, core personality concepts. All right, let's start with Section 1, psychological research methods, basically the tools of the trade. This is the absolute foundation of how psychologists actually know what they know. I mean, before we can talk about how the brain works, we have to understand the methods used to study it, right? When you inevitably see this concept on your exam, just remember that the independent variable is the thing the researcher is actively manipulating or applying. Think of it as the cause. For example, say you're testing a new drug to improve memory. Well, the drug itself, the thing the experimenter is actually giving to the subjects, that's your independent variable. It is the active intervention. And that is immediately followed by the dependent variable, which is quite simply your outcome. It's what you are actually measuring at the end of the day. So, continuing with that memory drug example, the dependent variable would be the subject's performance on a memory task after taking the drug. The independent variable is manipulated, and the dependent variable is observed to see what happened as a result. Cause and effect. Yeah, to actually test those variables, we compare an experimental group that gets the treatment to a control group that serves as our baseline. To really prove that our independent variable is the thing causing the change, we have to ensure both groups are completely matched in all characteristics. The only difference is that the control group might get a placebo, like a sugar pill, instead of the active drug. If the experimental group scores much higher on that memory test than the control group, boom, we can confidently say the drug had an effect. So, we've got the tools down, but what does the actual biological hardware driving our behavior look like? Like, how do all these billions of neurons actually organize themselves to make you, you? Let's move right into Section 2, brain structures and functions, the biological hardware. We're going to look specifically at the cerebral cortex, which is that wrinkled outer layer of the brain that houses the vast majority of our central nervous system's neurons. Okay, you definitely need to keep this straight in your head for the test. The hemispheres control the opposite sides of the body. The left hemisphere drives language and logic, and the right hemisphere drives spatial and perceptual skills. Now, they are connected by this thick band of fibers called the corpus callosum, so these two halves are communicating constantly. But remember their specialties. If a multiple-choice question asks about recognizing patterns or faces or maybe a melody, point to the right hemisphere. If it asks about grammar, speaking, or doing analytical math, point to the left. Now, let's take a super quick guided tour of the cerebral cortex and its 4 lobes. These govern pretty much everything from your physical movement to your vision. First up, the front lobe. This is your control center for movement and planning, and it notably houses Broca's area, which is totally crucial for speech production. Move back a little bit and you hit the parietal lobe, which processes bodily sensations. Then, at the very back of the head is the occipital lobe. Just think optics here. Damage this, and you seriously risk blindness because it is the primary visual cortex. Finally, on the sides, we have the temporal lobes. These are crucial for hearing, and they contain Wernicke's area, which is what actually allows us to comprehend language. Before we leave biology behind entirely, you absolutely need to lock in these sleep wave mnemonics. Beta means you are busy, alpha means you are almost asleep, and delta means deep sleep. Psychologists use an EEG to measure these brainwaves. When you're fully awake and totally focused, your brain produces these small, fast beta waves. As you start to relax, those kind of transition into slightly slower, larger alpha waves. And when you finally hit the deepest stages of sleep, stages 3 and 4, you enter delta wave territory. That's where you produce these slow, high-amplitude waves where it is incredibly difficult to be woken up. Honestly, it's kind of like when your alarm goes off on a Monday morning. Okay, so the crucial point here is that while we have this truly amazing biological hardware, we still need to understand how it interacts with the environment to actually learn. I mean, how exactly do we acquire new behaviors or phobias or just learn to navigate our everyday world? That brings us to Section 3, learning and conditioning, basically programming the software. Pay really close attention here, guys, because the distinction between these two concepts is absolutely guaranteed to be tested. Now, notice the clear contrast between the two types of conditioning. Pavlov's dogs were passive and involuntary, while Skinner's rats were active, voluntarily pressing levers for a reward. In classical conditioning, you are pairing a totally neutral stimulus, like a bell ringing, with an unconditioned stimulus, like food, until that bell alone triggers an automatic involuntary response, which is salivation. The learner isn't choosing to do this. Operant conditioning, on the other hand, is all about consequences. You voluntarily do something, and the environment either rewards you or punishes you, which directly changes the likelihood of you doing it again. To completely ace your midterm, make absolutely sure you do not confuse negative reinforcement with punishment. This trips everyone up. Both positive and negative reinforcement aim to increase a behavior. Positive adds a reward, like getting a gold star. Negative removes an annoyance, like, say, getting to skip a chore because you got an A on a test. You're increasing the good grades by removing the bad chore. Punishment, however, is designed to decrease a behavior by introducing a totally unpleasant stimulus. Just remember, punishment can have unintended side effects like avoidance learning and frustration, so reinforcement is generally considered a much more effective teaching tool. All of this leads us to a really fascinating question about human individuality and how our unique software expresses itself. Because if we all basically have the same brain structures and we all learn through the exact same basic conditioning, why are our behaviors, our emotional responses, and our social preferences so wildly varied? Let's move to our fourth and final section, core personality concepts, the traits that define us. When we talk about personality, we're referring to the relatively stable patterns of thoughts, emotions, and behaviors that consistently characterize us across a bunch of different situations. Modern psychology relies super heavily on the 5-factor model, and you can easily memorize this using one simple acronym, OCEAN. After decades of research analyzing how people describe each other, psychologists found that most personality characteristics group really neatly into 5 broad dimensions. So, let's break them down. Let's look at what each letter actually stands for, because this provides a really solid scientific framework to describe why we are the way we are. O is for openness to experience, basically how curious and imaginative you are. C is conscientiousness, your level of organization and discipline. E is extroversion, whether you draw your energy from social interaction. A is agreeableness, how cooperative and trusting you tend to be. And finally, N is neuroticism, which refers to emotional stability and how prone you are to stress and anxiety. What's wild is that these traits are relatively stable throughout adulthood, and they're actually consistent across many different cultures. Ultimately, personality is this incredibly complex interaction of both our biological nature and our environmental nurture. Now, the old debate used to treat these as competing forces, like it was one or the other, but modern psychology sees them constantly working together. For example, studies on identical twins who are reared completely apart show these astonishing, almost eerie similarities in their personalities. We're talking everything from their career choices right down to their nervous habits. That proves a massive genetic foundation, that is nature. However, environmental influences like our family, our culture, and our unique life events, they interact with those genes to shape how those traits are actually expressed out in the real world. As you're reviewing these notes for your exam, I want to leave you pondering this final thought. Knowing all this, how much of your personality is actually hardwired and how much is just waiting to be learned? Like, if genetics deal the cards and the environment plays the hand, where exactly does your own free will fit into the whole equation? Use this study blueprint to master the material, but definitely don't forget to marvel at the sheer complexity of the human mind you're studying. Best of luck on your exams, and thanks so much for tuning in to this explainer.